Juvenile Tiny Desk. I didn't enjoy it at all. So for him to be from New Orleans, and then I'll go from that into the conversation that we were having regarding just black women and black folk in love specifically. So the Tiny Desk was boring. It was extremely boring. With Juvie being from New Orleans, I was expecting this first when we talk about just the sound of the Tiny Desk that's supposed to be coming from the band, and with him coming from New Orleans, it just felt really melancholy, comparatively speaking. Like I received, and we know the difference between, some live bands that just have it and some that don't. I don't know if they just pieced them together. I don't know where these individuals are from. And again, it was majority black folk, but it just didn't give me that feel that I was expecting. And especially how they hyped it up, right? Like this was the Tiny Desk of Black Music Month. And for not having seen Juvenile in a while, like perform at this magnitude, right? Which Tiny Desk is, we know it's going to be viewed by millions of folk. I just thought the sound, and again, it could be just the space that they were in. It didn't lend itself to being as robust as it probably could have been. But even with that being said, like I've watched Tiny Desk previously with, we talk about Wale being from DC and how you heard that go-go sound from the band that he selected. So I just thought that was lackluster in itself. The crowd was awful, right? The crowd was awful in my opinion. But again, you're here in a space that's not the typical crowd for for them to be fans of Juvenile in that way. Even when I just saw a video a few minutes ago of Manny Fresh just being out there, it was young people and it was white people, right? And that's not the age range for those who grew up listening to Juvenile. And so I think on that front, just the audience, it didn't bring that energy that you would hope for. And then the songs, right? Like it's even like his cadence, his flow. It just was, again, he sounded like an adult, like a grown man. He didn't sound like a hungry 19, 20, 21-year-old. Like when he did Ha, I was just like, well, why can I understand all of the words that you're saying for Ha? Juvenile, I had to go on Ola, this before Genius, original hip hop lyrics archive, to understand what you were saying to in the song Ha. So I just found it to be, it just wasn't for me. And hopefully, maybe other people thought differently. But for me, it was just like a no-go. That's not something I'm going to go back and listen to. Unlike Babyface, unlike, who else did they have? Charlie Wilson, Charlie Killed It. Again, we talk about the bands were so amazing for that. And I think that sets the tone to what a Tiny Desk is supposed to look and sound and feel like. So we had this conversation, and then somehow we transitioned to a conversation about black folk and black men specifically who are palatable to white people. And we were talking about Tyler the Creator and Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, and how do we get there? How do we get to just them being palatable to white folk? Oh, because we were talking about just the crowd and how it was mostly composed of white folk and how that influences their ability to engage with the music that was being performed. And so we just went down this rabbit hole, and it got into a conversation just on interracial dating and just what that looks like in 2023 for black folk specifically. And the premise of the sister was that, and again, this has been a widely held belief amongst black folk, this idea that black women who go on to marry white folk, and some of the examples were given were like Serena Williams and Eve, even though I looked at that as being a distinction, because their pool is infinitely smaller when it comes to black men, just based off status, based on wealth. And so black women marry white men or date white men because they've exhausted the dating pool of black men. But conversely, black men date white women and marry white women for status, for protection, for yada yada yada. And so I just thought it was compelling that, I'm not gonna say that in 2023 we're still having this conversation, because again, it's very real, right? We talk about just what dating looks like and the assault on the black community historically, and how that influences our dating habits, that influence our how we show up in relationships. And my point in the argument, because I don't want to misinterpret what she was trying to say, but my point in the conversation was the influence of patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, and so on and so on has really had deleterious effects on black men for sure, but black men specifically, to where it's not until later in life that many folks start to look at, many brothers start to look at and realize the relationships they have in life aren't fulfilling. They aren't adding value to their life. And then they start to recognize, hey, I need to do some internal work. Hopefully that I need to do some internal work in order to really have these sustaining and fulfilling relationships. And by that point, and I guess her argument was, by that point, because it takes so long, and sisters have continuously endured, that they now have opened their options up at this point. And why doesn't it take place sooner? So it was just, for me, it's always encouraging just to have conversations with sisters who, and even though she's not reflective of all sisters, right, but just to understand her feelings, on how how and why she feels women show up the way that they do in this space. But more importantly for me, what needs to be done for men to be able to show up equally, right, and show up whole in these situations, right, and show up whole in these relationships. And for us, for me, she was like, well, what needs to be done? Or what do we need to do as women? And I always go back to this idea, and it goes to the same thing when we talk about like racism and white supremacy. It's nothing that black folk can do to combat white supremacy. That's not their responsibility. That's not their job, right? And so similarly, it's not women's responsibility to teach men, right? Now we can teach men at the expense of their own well-being, because I do believe in this idea of community and what that's supposed to look like, right? And so yes, teaching is an element within this, but it shouldn't come at the expense of your well-being. And that's when it becomes incumbent upon other brothers to really sit and have conversations with brother, hopefully reach them before they get to this 30 to 40 mark, where now they start to have this epiphany that they need to make healthier choices going forward. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. So that was the conversation that was going down earlier. Again, if you got a question, feel free to hit the joint. I don't know how y'all do it. I see a little question at the bottom, or if you want to join in live, feel free to hit the live button. Trying to think what else I've seen. I mean, the fireworks have been crazy, right? I still have no idea what fireworks have to do with, I'm not gonna say, I guess it's celebratory in some capacity, but the fireworks had me up at like 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and it still doesn't make sense, especially in the world that we're in today. Like, we should be more mindful of people's traumas. Again, if you have any understanding of what post-traumatic stress is and how that can be triggered by something like like fireworks. Don't ask me why they sell them on the street corners, right? Why that's allowed. And I'm not here for like government regulation of any and everything, but fireworks, I feel like you need 4 pieces of ID. You need to pay $1,000 in order to get one firecracker, right? Just to get one around this time. So, you know, because we're navigating that, and just interesting is because you can't tell the distinction between fireworks and gunshots are indistinguishable. You know what I'm saying? And so, saying there's fireworks at the house. There are fireworks bi-weekly for nothing. Meanwhile, I'm trying to sleep. Yeah, and so especially where we are in today's society, right? If we're talking about just this idea of fear and how it's captivated us all, and how it influences how all of us move. That's why they banned the Pooh Shiesty mask. This idea of fear that permeates the community, and fireworks are no freaking different. It has you thinking like there's literally gunshots. I can only imagine what the residents of, what was it, Southwest Philly, I think it was out like King Sussing, those residents who experienced the mass shooting. Now, was it 2 days ago? I guess it was Monday. This is Wednesday. That experienced this 2 days ago. I wonder if they thought, you know what, this is just firecrackers. Let me still just go ahead and go outside and handle my business as normal. But we know that situation wasn't that. They're an individual. The media continues to identify. I can't even think of the name. Kim Carricker. Yeah, I believe it's Kim Carricker, who is the alleged mass shooter in Southwest Philadelphia. They continue to identify this individual as he. I don't trust the media when it comes to identification of people and them recognizing their humanity, even in the midst of allegations that they committed such a heinous act. But when I see what took place there, I'm just thinking about what's the feelings and sentiments of a community when it comes to just this not only rapid gunfire that influences so much, but just consistent triggering of anxiety, just triggering of depression when it comes to these type of events. So I'm gonna use they to identify this individual. So they allegedly killed 5 people and wounded several more, and just went on a shooting spree. They had a bulletproof vest. They had a AK-47. They had a handgun, and they just went out shooting innocent people. And this isn't. I got to be careful how I word this. I'll say I'm not surprised. And I don't think anybody should be surprised when we see mass acts of violence that take place in this society specifically, because this is what it's been predicated on. This is what it was built on. It was built on the mass atrocities, mass killings of indigenous folk, built on the backs of millions of enslaved Africans. So to think that some 400 years later, 500 years later, that there's going to be some difference, that's not necessarily how change work, especially when you have white men, because that's what it is predominantly, who continue to affirm these concepts of violence. It permeates every aspect, every arena that we occupy. And so of course, why wouldn't somebody, and again, I don't know their mental health status, they had residents who said, listen, this person always walked around with a bulletproof vest on. They always walked around with a bulletproof vest on. And so that speaks to a level of potential. When I hear that as a therapist, what my clinician had on, that speaks to an individual who either feels extremely unsafe in their community, or there's like some deterioration of their well-being in some capacity, to whether it's paranoia or what have you, to then get to this point where now they have an AK-47 and they're out here just shooting people at random. But again, this is not an anomaly. This is what happens in societies where there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of love, there is a lack of respect, where it's this idea that rugged individualism is how you survive in this arena. Because ideally, if this individual is experiencing a mental health issue or some deterioration, and you see, and people in the neighborhood recognize this is when community is supposed to come together to assist this individual in some capacity. But this idea of community is foreign to here in America. This is why there is no we, because when you say we talk about community. There's no community here. Everybody operates in their individual silos as individuals, and then this and within their families, and then maybe they'll bring in some outside people in their network into their space. But ultimately, when it comes to understanding who your neighbor is and having a relationship with them, or just seeing the humanity in another, that just continues to never be a thing. We saw that with the young brother who was shot in the head because he was knocking on the door for some assistance. Like, people focused on this idea that, oh, you know what, this white man shot through the door because he saw a black boy and he felt threatened. Yeah, that's part of it. But the other part is there is this overt lack of trust, of humanity that exists between us. And so, yes, that young man was shot. But what if somebody knocks on your door and they need help, they need directions? You might not shoot them, but you might not open a door. You might tell them go ahead. We don't make I'll use I statements, right? There is times, and I've gotten much better at this. When we drive past somebody who's unhoused, who's homeless, we don't make eye contact, right? Because it's, what are you going to ask me for? Because we're so caught up, we're so self-absorbed as a community that we neglect the humanity in others. And so, yes, you might not want to give them $1 when they might want to ask you, right? Because we understand how difficult money is to come by in this society. But what does it mean to say, I wish you the best, or just say hello? Like, that's lost. So if we lost this general, or it was lost, we've never had this fundamental decency when it comes to our human interactions. What do you think is going to happen when you're in spaces where things like race, things like class start to play such a huge part in that specific society, or that specific community, that specific area, or that specific relationship that's about to take place? So I don't know. Like, I don't sit and wish for people to go to jail. I don't live that life. I talk about this idea of accountability and why that's critical in the conversations that we have when it comes to harm perpetuated against others. And there is going to be some measure of accountability for this individual. Philadelphia, I think there's a moratorium on the death penalty in Pennsylvania, which is always a good thing. I can never be a proponent of the death penalty. Why? Because they'll get that shit wrong, right? They've gotten it wrong. And so if they've gotten it wrong once, that should be enough to say, no more. No more. Because we have the ability to get it wrong again. But again, that's not how this system operates. That's not what white supremacy and this desire for law and order, that's not the get down, right? That's not how this goes. And so this individual will be they'll be incarcerated for the remainder of their life. Again, I don't know what restorative justice looks like when you murder 5 literally innocent people. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not going to pretend that I know what that looks like. But what I do know is, again, I can never advocate on behalf of the state. That fundamentally goes against everything that I believe in. And there's people much smarter than me that may have some what restorative justice, what accountability can look like. But yeah, some people just need to be removed from society and placed somewhere else. So yeah, it's just unfortunate because you read the stories about people. The one brother, he was on the phone with his girlfriend. He was just going to the store to get something to eat, and next thing you know, he's deceased. He's an ancestor. And so those are heartbreaking, right? Those are heartbreaking when you hear those stories. You hear about the lack of humanity that exists, the lack of self-love. And again, I can't speak to this individual's mental well-being, but to go out knowingly to kill, there's some pathological issues that exist for that to be a decision that's made. You get what I'm saying? And yes, it's like, oh, it's always mental health when it comes, because mental health is everything. It literally is everything. The majority of people who are living with mental wellness issues are nonviolent. So even the people who society has built up to be as a threat, we're talking about our unhoused people who may be experiencing mental wellness issues, who may be talking nonsensically to themselves. They are not a threat. They're not a threat. They're more likely to be victims of violent crimes and not perpetrators. But again, when it comes to this conversation on mental health, it's so poor. That's why you see individuals, even if an individual like, and I see Keish pulled up, salute to Keish. If you see an individual like Walter Wallace who may have a knife in his hand, there's a high likelihood that they're going to harm themselves and not somebody else. And again, this goes to the reasoning as why police shouldn't be primary responders to incidents where mental health issues are prevalent. And so again, I don't know what this individual was experiencing. But again, community members said their condition was deteriorating. They've been wearing a bulletproof vest. And so that never struck enough concern, because who do you call? Who do you contact and say, yeah, you know what, this individual they're wearing a bulletproof vest for no apparent reason? Who do you call to say that to? No, it's always in response to. So yes, it has to be a mass shooting of 5 people for community to get involved, for community to engage in the individuals who may be experiencing some psychological issues. This individual may just be a sociopath, a psychopath. That's a distinct possibility as too. This notion that there won't be mass shootings is problematic in itself. That it won't be mass killings is problematic in itself, because that's just not the reality, because you're dealing with people. And everybody doesn't have the same capacity. And so it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. That's why you have so many people who push back against this idea of access. Right? Access to firearms like AK-47s. That just shouldn't be a thing. Do you think police should go through trauma-informed training of some sort? I don't think so, because I don't believe in the police. Right? I don't believe in the police in any way, because what they represent, they represent historically a system that has always been been just the origins of it is rooted in harm and violence and oppression against the people, right? And so this is the idea why I always say, like, black folk, brown folk, non-white folk who enter this space, they're sacrificing a part of themselves in order to be a part of this community. They're sacrificing a part of their historical identity in order to be a part of this community, because this they talk about protect and serve. That's never been what this is about, right? It's how can I put this? It's always been about, whether we're talking about this or just this idea of overseeing, right? To intimidation. Like, this has always been the thing. And then using violence when necessary, which is more often than not, whether it's psychological, emotional violence, or physical violence. I was listening to the good brother Bomani Jones. This was some years ago. This was actually during the pandemic, but it always stood out. He talked about this, that cops, when we talk about violence perpetrated by cops and the killings specifically, or the severe maiming of individuals by the police, it's because police operate under the fundamental idea that if you're trying to carry 4 dozen eggs, it's a possibility that you might break some. Right? That may happen. You may drop an egg or two if you're trying to carry several dozen eggs. And so it's just the cost of doing business. It's just the cost of doing business. And so you can't hold them accountable, because what they're tasked to do supposedly is just so difficult. And that's why they want to use terms to describe the work that they do, that they're heroes. Well, no, you're not heroes. There's nothing heroic within this. Like, you signed up for this, right? Once you take off your white shirt or your blue shirt, you're cool. You're fine. Unlike the people that you police and over police. So what is the best way to police the police in our community? Again, it should never be a thing. First and foremost, I always got to start with that. Having police should not be a thing. However, since it is, again, is there a way to effectively oversee those who have the ability to do whatever the hell they want? Right? So if there's no real accountability, then what actually are we overseeing? Because, yeah, you might get one cop or two, right? And we've seen it. You might get one cop or two who might get arrested because they go above and beyond the call of duty, no pun intended, harming people, killing somebody. Like the white guy that murdered George Floyd. You might get one, right? But that's usually the extreme. And so in reality, is there really an effective way to police, in your words, Mike, or monitor or oversee what the police do? Probably not. Not until there's no such thing as qualified immunity. But that's never going to be a thing. That's never going to be a thing. Because, again, they've been given celebrity status within the communities. They've been given passes, and they've been emboldened by both conservatives and liberals. You know, I see folk who I'm cool with, who I like. I like they get down as politicians. If I ever was to be a politician, I'd be like, you know what? I want to be just like that person. But in the same community where they're over policing and taking pictures with these individuals who are causing harm, right? And causing harm, nah, that's just, for me, that's not it, right? So just to be clear, we don't need a system of law and order. No, you came in late, Los. You came in late. No, what we don't need is how it's currently constructed, how it's currently constituted. And so, yeah, I'm one of those individuals who say you need to abolish the police, and there needs to be another form of accountability for those who do not who cause harm in the community. There definitely needs to be some level of accountability. And I'm not going to say I'm not necessarily opposed to having. I was talking about the mass shooter. I believe it's Kim Carricker that was in Southwest Philly. Yes, some people need to be permanently sat down. But you're not going to hear me advocate for prison. Because just when we talk about just the inhumane conditions related to prison, like, yes, somebody broke rules of how you're supposed to, of public engagement and how you're supposed to engage with folk. But then to be put in these type of settings, I just don't know if that's conducive to society as a whole by just throwing the people away. Because the fact of the matter is, like, we have all these conversations. So we talk a lot about, and again, right? Because it ain't no we in America. There's a lot of conversation about 500 murders in the city of Philadelphia. How many, let's say 500 murders were committed by 400 people. Who's sitting down with those 400 people to understand the root causes of why 500 murders took place? Nobody. So again, we're not necessarily concerned with preventative measures. We're always going to be reactionary. We're never going to really take violence serious, because if you did, the people who are best known to shut it down, or not shut it down, best known to understand it, are those who perpetuate it. Think about white collar crimes, right? What's that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? It was him and Tom Hanks, and he was like was he a hacker or a fraudulent person? But the FBI brought him in and was just like, yo, we need you to help us with understanding the mind of individuals who work like this, who commit these white collar crimes. We don't get that with crimes of violence. It's just like automatically we just throw you away. This is why folk like Tookie Williams, and again, he was held accountable in the way that we hold people accountable here. But this is why they used to have in-depth conversations with him. This is why his children's book were lauded, because you had an individual who's had these experiences. Now they're talking about what led them to these experiences, to engage in these type of actions. And now you're talking about like where we sensationalize it. I'm not saying do a Snowfall that's loosely based on Ricky Ross's life. I'm not saying do that. But we're having real conversations about understanding the mindset behind it. That's why I like the show Mindhunters on Netflix. Even though I believe it's like loosely based on the what is it? With the FBI, like the criminal minds aspect. Like, it's loosely based on the origins of that, right? But they're sitting here with these serial killers and they're trying to understand. They're trying to learn. That's why in Silence of the Lambs, when they went to go see Hannibal Lecter, because they wanted to find and understand the thought process of Wild Bill, so they go to these individuals, but this never takes place here. And so we wonder why, again, it's always the same thing that's taking place. Imagine if you sat down with young folk under the age of 18 who've committed a murder to understand like what the cause of that was. They might talk about social media. They might talk about their home life. They might talk about the unhealthy relationships with peers. They might talk about how nobody believed in them within the school setting. We just throw that by the wayside. There's so much data out there that can potentially improve how we address these issues. But again, we get caught up in the politics of it all. And again, I'm saying we, because there is no we. We get caught up in the politics of it all. So, what time is it? Oh, it's 8:41. So, I really ain't got much left. Figured I'd just do this once a week or so. Just come on here and chop it up. All right, I really ain't got much. So if you enjoyed the content, I gotta say this. Head on over to Rhetorically Speaking on YouTube at Philip Roundtree, or on streaming platforms, #YouGoodMan and Rhetorically Speaking. You can listen and check it out. Until next time, peace.